Hello there, and welcome back to Ask the Trainer. Thanks for joining us again. And I'm delighted to be joined by the usual training team, Ellie, Matt, Jonas, and Darren. Hey, guys.
Hey.
Hello.
Hey.
And extra delighted that Claudia from Forger is joining us. Hey, Claudia.
Hi.
All the way from Valencia in Spain. And we'll talk more about this because, of course, Forger is part of our new family in Maxon. So we'll talk more about that. But firstly, just to give you a bit of information about the usual stuff, where here we go. I think I'm still online. I've got a spinny beach ball. Oh, there, we're back. Okay. So we on the screen here, we've got the usual Maxon events page, which is listing out all the various things. Please join us next week for the 3D motion show, where we got some wonderful artists who will be showing all sorts of fantastic techniques, including the team from Perception, who will be talking about how they made the titles for WandaVision. So that's going to be really exciting. And also, don't forget that next Monday, we've got a continuation of our visualization in Cinema 4D, where we're talking next Monday specifically about product visualization. And how to get all those nice, wonderful reflections and also variations in surfaces. And so please join us for that. And also, we are recording these, as you well know by now, that we're recording these on the Maxon Training channel. Here we go, on YouTube. So just go type in Maxon Training Team and you'll see all the recordings. And as well as the recordings of the 1-hour webinars, we're also having lots of the 20-second tips. We've got about 100 tips or so on there. And Nick just recorded one on the C4D commander option. So this is training within 20 seconds. But I just wanted to point out on these things, there's inside the comments or the description in YouTube, you have the ability to click on these links. So if you click on the link about this subject, it usually takes you to a much wider description. Like on a Cineversity, for example, you can click on this link and it takes you to more information about the commander. So we've got the ability to kind of link to further resources. So just have a look at the descriptions area whenever you see any of our sessions on YouTube. And also, here's the thing about Forger. So forger.app is the site to look at, and we'll talk more about that if you've got any questions about Forger. But and also Claudia can answer them more intelligently than I can, of course. But Forger is a wonderful app where you can do sculpting actually on a device, and so you can actually interact with the screen a bit more intuitively than with a mouse. And I know several of us absolutely love sculpting with mice on the computer, not necessarily. So this is a wonderful addition to that. So we can ask questions on that. And also, Claudia organizes all the tutorials for Forger. So we'll add a link in here to the tutorials about how you can learn more about it too. But there's a link on the Forger site. So you just go to forger.app, and then there's all the information about here and like about Forger. And I love the quote here. So if it is for you, if you spend 2 hours a day commuting on the train and you only thought, I wish I could finish that arm that I was modeling. So yes, that's exactly, every time I'm on the train, that's what I think too. So I think that's a lovely way to put it. And you can probably guess, we're having a sculpting theme this month. So we're going to talk about specifically sculpting inside Cinema 4D, and if you've got any questions about any related sculpting things, please let us know, because we found that that's quite a useful thing to dedicate for each particular time we're doing these Ask the Trainer sessions. And that's also a reminder, that's what it is. Please chuck in your questions. Hi to Mohammed from Casablanca. Thanks for messaging us. And feel free to ask your question, because that's the whole point of these sessions. They're interactive and live, somewhat unstructured, so that we can just answer questions about stuff that you'd like to know. So whilst you're thinking about the what questions you'd like to ask, I'll ask a question. So may I ask Claudia? Hi, Claudia. Hi. What is Forger?
What is Forger? So it's, in a few words, it's an app just for you if you don't want to be on your desktop. It's an app for sculpting and painting, and yeah, if you just, it's a portable workstation actually.
Fantastic. And just whilst we're waiting for some questions, we set something up where we can actually show the what Forger looks like. Would you mind doing that? I can make you a presenter just briefly. Here we go. So I could make you a presenter. If you haven't seen it, you can download this from the App Store. At the moment, it's iOS only, isn't it, Claudia?
Yeah. Yeah, this one. I don't know if you can see.
So I've just clicked on the thing to make you a presenter.
Okay, then give me a second.
Here we go. Yes, we can see.
Okay.
Your iPad. Yes.
Good. So this is the. Let me see if I. Okay, here. So this is the first screen that you will see when you open the app. So you have all. If it's the first time, you won't see anything more than the templates. But if you are familiar with it, you will have some. I don't know. I'm embarrassed because I'm not an artist. So, but yeah. So basically, if you can always start from sphere, and then usually what I do, I use the Apple Pencil because I've tried a lot of times with my fingers and I'm so clumsy, so I prefer the Apple Pencil. So yeah, then you have the brushes here on your right. You can move, actually, you can set the app the way you prefer. So you can have it there or there, even the left. If you are left-handed, you go to preferences, and then let me remember if it's oh my god, I can see it now. Somebody. So you can here, you have here the left-handed, and then you have all the menus for you. But yeah, and then you can change the color as well, depending. I think for the one that comes with the app is the blue one, but I change it every week or so because I like to see different colors. And then the border. Then you can play. I mean, it's just for the beginner. It's just discovering things. I don't know if you have any question. I just started talking. I'm sorry.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. What I like, I had a little play with it, and I like the fact that it does symmetrical modeling, because that's the when I first started in Cinema 4D, which I did in 2007, although I didn't keep my chops up anything like as the rest of the team here. But I always managed to not be able to sculpt symmetrically. In fact, perhaps that's a good topic we could look at in Cinema, if we have time, about how you do that automatically, because that's what I like straight away in Forger, where I was able to sculpt something and it did it on both sides of the object.
Yeah, and then if you go, you have here on the top the symmetry menu. So you can, if you can see, you have here a line there, a white line. So you just, if you don't want to see it, you just disable it from there.
That's
but then
cool.
you enable it there, so as you can see just one side. And then what happens if you are sculpting and you see that there is the symmetry is enabled, but it's not exactly the same? That sometimes happens to me. So you go to make symmetrical and you choose which axis you prefer.
Cool, excellent.
I don't know.
Very nice.
How does it determine where do you know how it chooses where the plane of symmetry is when you use that command? Is it like a bounding box, or is it the geometry?
So at the left, at the bottom, left bottom, you have here the axis. I don't know if you can see it. There is so small.
Actually,
there.
on my screen, I don't know about anyone else, but on my screen, like the bottom edge is cut off.
No, I can't see the bottom.
Really?
There we go.
Oh, now I see the
There,
bottom.
I'm sorry. It was because I have it there. Okay, so there, you have the axis.
Okay.
Okay, and then if you prefer, you have here the axis. So it's X, Y, and Z, and it's absolute coordinates.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
I think it's cropped when we're going either when you're showing the bottom of the screen, the top of the screen. I'm amazed that we managed to get an iPad sharing through GoToWebinar anyway. So I think that's a function of how we're showing the screen. But that's so yes, at least we've seen it. That's good.
I don't know why it's cut off. Let me see.
I think it's just
Is
a
better?
sizing issue.
No, I don't know why.
So we had a question from Robert about making. I assume this, Robert, is a question about Forger, about a PC version and so on. What I would say is that because Forger's just come on board with Maxon as a member of the family, we are excited that we're now joining the engineering team together. And so we're thinking about what might be the best workflows and how we might make that work. Since it's so easy to actually do these manipulations actually on a device, and what would work as a workflow. So we'd love to hear from you if you've got any suggestions for that too, and things that you have or pain points that you would like solved in that. I think that'd be really handy. But would that be a good question for us to ask, Matt? I remember you showing me some things with the actual creating and sculpting and doing it simultaneously. Would you mind just showing that thing about doing a symmetrical versus non-symmetrical sculpt on just how you'd start off that in Cinema?
Sure. Do you want to throw the screen?
I'm going to throw the screen at you.
Look out.
Duck, yeah.
There's a kitty coming at you.
Yeah, probably. So the obligatory, here's one I made earlier. Oh, look what's there.
Ooh. Nice.
So this is something I've done, but this is not what you want to show, but we can come back to that at another point. So if I just do file and new, then I mean it's fairly simple to kind of get going with sculpting. So I mean I can just use a simple sphere if I want to make it editable, because you need to be able to edit and adjust all of the points and stuff. And then I'll click subdivider a couple of times, and then where are we? No, not yet. Dunk, dunk. So the tools in Cinema allow you, obviously, in the same sort of way as Forger, to draw onto something. And you can, of course, as Simon said, you can get the issue where you've been busy drawing on something and you've not gone to the other side. So there are a couple of ways around that. One is very similar to what Claudia was just showing us, which is that in the settings, you can choose to go to symmetry down here. So you've got an extra tab. The linking size, linking pressure, and link symmetry link to the different tools, which means that you don't have to set up symmetry in each of the different tools. So I'm going to press that. And very similar in the same way, you can choose the axis that you want to work on. So if I choose X, Y, you can see that I'm getting the XY side there. If I choose Y, sorry, you get the XZ, which is up and down. And you can choose the Z, which is both sides. You can, if you want, go completely doolally and choose all three even. And I can create these intertwining. And it doesn't matter whether you cross that border, as long as you are able to do it, it will create and draw that, add that sculpting detail to either side. So it doesn't matter, you don't have to do it on just one quarter to work with this. So let's just undo that really quickly. And that's kind of how you set up symmetry, really. And it means that I can go to different tools now because I've got symmetry linked, and I can just grab stuff out. So I think I've made a Pokemon. No.
It's always good to make a Pokemon.
That was really easy, wasn't it? and I can smooth and it will do both sides. If at some point you do happen to only do stuff on one side because you've forgotten to link symmetry, or you didn't turn it on, or you just, you forgot, there is thankfully the ability to sculpt symmetry down here, which is a command that you can use instead. So you can click sculpt symmetry, and then you can choose which way you want to flip it. Where is the axis that you want to work? Do you want to just mirror the layer that you are working on, mirror the mask, or mirror the entire object? You can also equalize as well. So if one of them is slightly further up and further down, if you've done some work but you want to kind of like balance the two out, then you can do that instead. So if I just press mirror object, then boom, it's put that sculpting detail on the other side.
I remember when they added that feature, like how exciting that was, because I can't tell you how many times I'd forget to turn on link symmetry, and then I'd do a whole bunch of work on the other side, and then I'd like an hour later be like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And then I'd totally forget.
Absolutely. So it's been an absolute saver for me as well. Occasionally when I sort of like loaded up, forgot, and gone, damn it.
Matt, would you say, was there, when you're starting off doing sculpting like this in cinema, from your various years of teaching students how to do it, would you say that there was something that people asked over and over again that you would think that would be a good thing, that if everyone kind of knew that first, then they would save them so much time later on?
Not a particular question that I get asked over and over again, but I think the biggest thing to let people know about is the fact that there are layers that you can use inside sculpting, which would have saved people a lot of time if they'd have known that. So very similar to kind of Photoshop, you've got the ability of sculpting different things on like having different things on different layers. So you can add like big detail. So if I just try this, so here it is, sculpting layer, and this is layer 1. What do you want to call it? So let's call it big sculpt, and this will make sense in a minute. So I'm going to use brush sizes, increase my brush size, which thankfully is the same as Photoshop, so it's the square brackets, and I'm going to make a lot of information there. Let's whack that pressure up. So I'm adding quite a lot of deformation here, and I'm adding some more stuff. I have no idea what I'm making, by the way. I'm just like rounding stuff out.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. This is why I sculpt.
Which NFT site are you going to sell this on?
Yeah, that's it. This will be my NFT. I've got really temptation to do tiny little eyes, and I feel like I've just made a Nintendo character. But this is big sculpt, which means I can turn this on and off. And then what I can do, I can add another layer, and let's call this small sculpt. So I'll whack my brush size down, and let's add in detail. So let's add in this hairline or whatever it is I'm about to create. I have no idea.
We've got people guessing what it is. So far, it could be a flock of seagulls, Singer, or Robert's saying it could be a cobra.
Yes, yeah, I can see both of those. It isn't. I'm not actually aiming towards anything, but nonetheless, I've now got a second layer which I can turn on and off. And it means that you can separate the things that you do, as well as that, you can also choose the strength. So if I think I really liked that, but that was a bit much, I can tone that up and down, which is incredibly helpful for kind of going, I really overdid that, but I can tone it down without having to resculpt. If I do my Blue Peter moment and I go back to the, here's one I made earlier, there is a small refresh issue because of the size of my file. You can see the number of files, the number of layers that I used to kind of choose which stuff I leveled stuff out with. So I did fine leg wrinkles, I did arm wrinkles, and then I did big scales and small scales, and I could, you know, tone them up and tone them down to just decide that actually I need to bring that in and bring that down so that it isn't quite as crazy as it would have been. So if I...
That is so cool.
And another thing that you can see here quite well is that you don't necessarily have to sculpt on each layer using the same level of detail in the geometry. So you can do the the big sculpt on a layer that has got level 2 or level 3 in terms of subdivision, and then you can add your fine details like these creases and so on like a fine sculpt layer on top, which has got a deeper or a higher level of subdivision.
Yeah, so as you can see, to demonstrate what Jonas is just saying, if you can see, I've got very few numbers of polygons. So if I wanted to try and get skin detail in here, like I did on the raptor, I'm not going to do anything at all. So what I'm going to need to do is go back to my object and then subdivide a few more times. Dunk, dunk. Let's see if my Mac will cope. Bump. There we go. Let's turn off that. So now I have a really high subdivision, well, not really high subdivision, 1.9, but I can do a sculpt layer on here, and now I've got the ability of doing much finer detail, which doesn't really obviously help with just cloning like the sculpting like this. But if I was to use something that would allow me to do a better brush or stencil, actually, where is skin?
Here we've got elephant skin.
There is the word skin somewhere. There's a few there.
Alphabetical.
Yeah, I always forget. And I'm just.
There you go.
So if I lower my brush, I can now paint the skin in and get that detail on this layer, whilst having still the ability of choosing, going back and choosing the big sculpt impression that this makes. You have to decrease to go back. So I can now go back to big sculpt and I can whack that up, and then I can go back to increase and come back to my detailed layer, and there I have it. Uh-oh, I've just pressed it again. So you've still got that flexibility of adding in the detail that you want on the different layers and separating it out so that you can choose later on how much impact you want it to have. And of course, forget to put symmetry on.
Brandon did have a question a few minutes ago about subdividing and whether it creates triangles or quads by default.
I saw that, and that was to do with Forger. In Cinema, it is quads. In Forger, I'm assuming it's quads, but Claudia will be able to answer that more than I can.
Yeah, let me see. Yeah, I think, yeah. I don't know. Oh, I thought you was seeing my screen, sorry.
No, it's all right.
But yeah, it's, yeah.
So it's quads.
Well.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And there was a related question as well about importing an object into Cinema and then sculpting from that object rather than having to do it from scratch.
Yes, I mean, that's no problem whatsoever. Cinema 4D actually has its own base models as well. So in the content browser, if I do a search for is it sculpting? Oh, please tell me I've downloaded them.
Base mesh.
I thought it was base.
Yeah, base mesh.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, okay.
So there are several. A whole folder. There we go. A whole folder of different pre-made meshes. Oh God, did I see that? Okay, here's one that you made earlier, but I sculpted into it. That's my thing. So if I hide my sphere, you can see that the Velociraptor that I started with was part of the stuff that you can get in the content browser with no detail on it whatsoever. And then I decided, obviously, to add in as much detail as I could working on the layers. So these are pre-made meshes, and you are able to bring in any model at all, and you can subdivide, and then you can sculpt into it.
Can you sculpt?
Cool.
Oh, sorry, there's a question from Lee here saying about sculpting in triangles or a triangle polygon object and then transforming it back to quads afterwards. Are there any issues with that? Any things to look out for?
That's not something I've ever done, but we do have a remesher. So there is a remesher now in Cinema 4D that would allow you to convert that. I can't. It's been a while.
You can also project the sculpted mesh onto another mesh
That's true.
Can have like the topology you want.
Yeah, that's the thing with the automatic conversions from tris to quads, is that you know, they do it their own way. They don't necessarily know what you're thinking, and you know, that
want it
it's
to be.
yeah.
But the point is, whenever you import an object, and maybe if you animated or rigged a character before, for example, you know that it's a best practice to use quads only, at least for character meshes, because they deform best and they work best when you when you rig them and skin them. In the sculpting process itself, like in cinema, the subdivision algorithm is the Cadmel-Clark algorithm, which will always produce quads. Also, if you have triangles or n-gons as like the input mesh, as soon as you subdivide it once, you have like a quad mesh only. But then you can definitely reproject it on, well, the point is, whenever you finish your sculpt, you would bake all of this detail that you created into the original mesh in form of textures. So you would bake the textures and apply them via material to the object that you sculpted. And this way you can have a light object that is, well, light enough to be animated and such things. And all of the detail is going to be created by the textures. And those textures are then also render independent. So you can use them in physical, in Redshift, and in any other third-party renderer.
That's interesting.
And game engines.
Yeah, game engines as well.
Quick question for Claudia. In the same way that Matt was just showing brushes to paint on, if you like, texture, does Forger have the ability to do similar things with brushes?
Yeah, you have the normal stamps for sculpting, and then for painting as well.
Got it. Okay, that's interesting. And a general question to you all: we're making these small indentations, as you did with the texture of the skin here, in geometry, aren't you, Matt?
Yeah.
So is there a trade-off between doing that and, say, doing that as a different method with materials? So you're not actually generating the texture with geometry, you're doing that artificially. Is there a good time to do that and a bad time, depending on lighting?
It depends on basically what kind of Darren and Jonas were just saying. It really depends on what your output is going to be. If you're going to do a sculpt in Cinema 4D, it's going to stay in Cinema 4D, stay still and look pretty, then sculpting is fine. If you're going to do a sculpt and the eventual mesh is going to end up in a games engine, and therefore it needs a very low poly thing, then you need to use a texture. But what this process is, I've just sort of started here, is the ability of taking my sculpt data and turning it into very bad. If I press render, was that too low a polygon thing, do we reckon?
No, I think you just bake the normal.
Yeah,
if you bake the displacement, then it will look the same.
I'll turn that off.
So for those of us not in the know, what's the difference between normal and displacement baking that you've just done there?
Well, a displacement map or the displacement channel in a material always really deforms the geometry, whereas a normal map would just fake, like would fake the detail on the surface, but it wouldn't actually deform it. So as a rule of thumb, you could say that it is good to bake rough details into a displacement map and very fine details into a normal map. So if you have like, let's say you have a close-up of a character, of a head, then it might be good to have like all of the creases, like the creases that you have when you raise your brows, for example, like these that you see here, as displacement, but all of the very fine detail in the skin that Matt already painted before, this could be in a normal map, for example, because you actually don't need that to be real geometry. Yeah. This would just like bring up the render times, and yeah, it just doesn't make sense because it makes everything heavy.
That's great information. Thank you. And that's a great point about the difference between where it's going to end up as well. Yes. Plus, we always want it to look pretty in all formats. I think that's a technical term, which is probably a checkbox on the render output. Keep
the make pretty button. Yes.
Yes, exactly. In fact, that's what we're doing next week on the visualization with the products. And Ellie's got a few tricks with the iPhone model for that. Yes. Sorry, small little plug for next week's session.
No shame.
Exactly. Quick question from Vitas. How are the UVs handled by the Sculpt for Cinema and the Forger app? And he's asking especially when you start with a base mesh.
Good question. I mean, the UVs in this instance, because I started with a sphere, are really quite simple. So I'll just let it do that. It is that, and it is the UVs that it actually uses when it exports out the sculpt data as well. So if you're expecting to sculpt, to export out your sculpt data, you do need a decent form of UV map, which I would definitely recommend you probably did before you start sculpting, just for a workflow. At least you know that your UVs are ready when you get to round to exporting anything.
Does the what's that? Isn't there even a brush that's really dependent on the UV? Like what is the repeat brush?
I don't know.
I was thinking maybe that used UVs, but it may just be the brush size. Never mind.
Okay.
Claudia, how are the UVs treated in Forger?
So in Forger, the UVs are respected. If you use the remesh, it will delete them. But because the UVs creates the geometry. So if the original model has UVs, it will keep them.
Got it. Okay. So you can import an original model and then start to manipulate it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the same in Cinema 4D. Once you remesh a model, it will completely like get rid of the original UVs. But usually, if you do something where you need UVs, remeshing is not isn't something you would do, because you always have to be like aware of the edge flow and so on, and therefore you won't let any software just randomly change your mesh and therefore the UVs. So if you really need a very decent and solid UV layout, you stick with the original mesh that you had and never press the remesh button. Yeah. Because this will generate a volume-based, like voxel-based mesh, or a remeshing based on voxels, which will result in those typical open VDB meshes that you get, like also when you create a volume mesh inside of Cinema 4D, like with the volume generators. But the downside with that is that there will always be a spherical UV unwrap of this, at least in Cinema 4D. I don't know what it is like in Forger, but in Cinema 4D you will have like a spherical unwrap then, which probably never is what you need later, unless it's static and it's not too much detailed and doesn't have too many concave parts and so on. So yeah, because like spherical unwrapping can create UV overlaps quite fast, and this is definitely something you want to avoid.
Yeah, yeah. Forger also has a way to create automatic UVs and a way to import them if needed, and also uses a planar mapping when generate automatic UVs when you press it. Yeah.
Very cool. A great question that's just going to come in from Carlos. What's the best advice you'd give somebody who wants to start modeling in Cinema 4D? And what would you say is the best workflow? Or is it as simple as just start and keep going?
This is definitely a depends.
It depends.
Yeah.
What I was going to say, I was starting to type an answer to him, was I definitely suggest, so you want to start modeling in Cinema 4D, make sure that you are as comfortable moving around in 3D view as you can be, so it's just totally natural for you. And at the same time, you want to get a grips with the different types of generators and primitives that there are, so that you can sort of see what tools you have to create the types of basic shapes that you may want to sculpt on and model with. And as you work with those, get more familiar with them, get deeper into them, you'll start to see how there are different ways. And but that's what I would suggest for starting. There's also a series on Cineversity that I was going to post the link to.
I was just about to jump in with the Cineversity bingo card stamp.
I think the other thing to remember is most of us never know how to model something until we start trying to model it. So don't be disheartened if it doesn't work to start with. None of us know how to model something until we're generally confronted with it, or we do it all day, every day. It's the same thing. So don't be afraid to put a model down at a certain point and go, this isn't working, but I know if I put it down now and start again, I'll have it done in a third of the time. And I've done that. I've done that over and over again. I've done a project that I've been doing for 3 days, and on the 4th day I've gone, nope, this just isn't working, and start again. And within a morning, I'm further than I was in those 3 days, because you've learned so much by doing it and what you needed to have done and what you should have done. So the other thing I recommend is save often and save incremental. If you don't know this is a godsend. So make sure you save incremental, which means it will basically add 0, 0, something, 1, 2, 3 after your file name, which means if you think, damn, it was only in the last day that I've gone wrong, go back to yesterday's save. This will help you so much, because you can definitely model yourself into a corner, as I call it, and this will help you go back to a point that allows you to maneuver your way out before that happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you also texture paint yourself into a corner?
Yeah, a little bit, but you can turn layers off easier than you can unmodel something.
I suppose so. That's true. Follow-up question from Jonathan. When bringing in photogrammetry 3D captured objects into Cinema, what advice would you give for cleaning up the imported models?
Don't touch it.
Well, there's one thing. You can roughly remodel it, and well, when we're talking about scan data, we don't just have like the geometry data. Usually we have like a texture map with it, and you don't want to have a look at the UV on the unwrapped UVs of that scan, because they are completely messed up, I can promise you. But there is one thing that you can do. You can, for example, I had this situation where I've been to an event and they scanned my whole head, and then I was there with my head inside of Cinema 4D, but well, at some point I needed to remesh it in order to like get it working in any way. So what I did is I used the same, well, I used the base sculpt mesh of the male bust, and then I just put it into place as good as possible, and then I shrink wrapped it onto the scan so that it's almost the same geometry. And so this is how you can get the geometry into place, at least if you have like a high dense mesh that you project onto that. And what you can do then is you can apply a 100% reflective material to that object, to the good mesh. And also, let me think. Yeah, also apply the texture from the scan into the luminance channel. It's getting a little bit confusing here. But what you can do then is you can bake the reflection into a texture. And you can do that both ways, with inverted normals and normal, well, outwards normals. And then you can bring those textures together in Photoshop. Well, give me 3 minutes. I can search for that file that I created.
In short, the trouble is with photogrammetry stuff is that the computer is creating an algorithm that tries to piece together geometry and texture and ties the two together. So the moment you try to adjust the model, you will warp the texture that you are given. If you try and rejig the UV, it will no longer fit to the model that you had. So it's a very tricky scenario to work with. It really depends on what you wanted to do with it. I mean, we do have the remesher, and our remesher does allow you to keep the UV edges the same when you remesh something, but that doesn't necessarily mean it won't shift the internal UV to texture geometry.
Yeah, may I grab the screen?
You can.
Absolutely.
I want to say two things about what you were just saying, Matt, because you're making me think of Vamp, which probably wasn't made for that. But also there is the that's
creepy.
I freaked out, dude.
That's
it's
a little
uncanny. It's almost photorealistic.
So
the other thing I was thinking of real quick, sorry, was the texture remap.
Okay.
Right, where you can have a texture that's assigned with some UVs, and then that can be remapped to different UVs.
It's not a workflow I've attempted, so
okay.
I'll have to nod and smile on that one and bow to your wisdom. You can tell me.
I'm not that wise. Be honest.
So yeah, that's me back in the day when I had hair. And if you have a look at the mesh, that's the scan data. That's what came out of the scanning software. So you can see it's a triangle mesh all over the place, and it's really, really bad. And it's even worse if we open the UVs. If you shift double click a UV tag, you can see the UVs. So well, it works somehow. We've got some bigger patches, and you can see the UV island edges here, but still, this is nothing you want to work with. What you actually want to have is like something more in this direction. So it was just a test, and as I said, I was using the generic head bust here, and I think this is already like a stage 2 modified thing. What I actually did is I shrink wrapped this onto the original geometry, and then what you can do is you create a material that is 100% reflective, and this material, maybe let me just add this on here, and let's also bring up this guy here, what you can do then.
You'd gone all Terminator on us.
Sorry?
You'd gone all Terminator on us with the shiny
Yeah,
face.
It's
Silver
creepy when
Surfer, please.
it's creepy when you work on it. But what we actually want to create is a texture in the end that is looking like this, like so. You know, so this is what I created out of that by simply applying this 100% reflective material, and then in the original Jonas scan, I made sure that the texture is in the luminance channel, so my bake won't get affected by light and so on. And what I then did is, well, I baked this using the bake tag, and here you can see in the options, I'm baking the reflections, and maybe let's preview this. And here you can see that because it's pointing, the mesh normals are pointing outwards, it's catching everything that is like outside of the mesh, that's closer to like the sky. And now if I would invert the normals of this mesh here and bake again, I would get the missing parts. You can see there are black parts in here and you don't want them. This way I would get the other part, and then I could like combine them in Photoshop or so. And this way I can get like a texture that in the end looks like this, which is very clean, something you can work with, and so on. So that's something you could do. It's a little bit cumbersome, and this was just like a little test, but I thought it was somehow working. So this would be my way to go, of course, with a much more subdivided and better edge flow mesh than the generic head does. But yeah, here you can see that in general, this workflow is working. I mean, it looks a little bit different, but I think if we're not talking about a close-up or something, it would work. Like if yeah, I would just fall down a cliff like in the background, this would work.
That's interesting, because that kind of answers Logan's question, which was talking about taking the triangle mesh and making it quads without ruining it.
Yeah.
If you've got a photogrammetry model, yeah, this is a workflow which is ingenious, by the way. I think it's brilliant. You've basically used a reflection, a 100% reflective layer to capture a reflection of you, so that you can make a normal texture out of it. Or
well, that's like internally, this is how like a texture baking algorithm would work as well, as far as I know. So it wasn't my idea. I just found it somewhere and replicated it. But
Leon's got a follow-up question about if you didn't have the original mesh, and if you had to model your own face, would you model poly by poly?
No, I'd start with the base mesh.
See, I wouldn't personally. No? I would take a front view and a side view, and I would polygonally get the general gist, and if I needed more data, I'd sculpt into it. But this is just a preference. You know, there's no right or wrong with this. It's just that's how I would do it. And I'm sure somebody using other sculpting software would go, hey, I'd start with a sphere, and all of a sudden magic would happen and you would have, you know, Jonas's face, which is just, you know, insane for me. So I would polygonally model first, because that's where I feel the most comfortable.
It's like the episode of SpongeBob where he starts with a beautiful painting and then says, and now I can reduct it to make a perfect circle.
We had a question earlier that was about the what would you advise people, or what are the caveats people are like running into? And there are actually two more that I want to add. One is when you're using a graphics tablet, first of all, sometimes when you then navigate in the viewport, and by the way, this doesn't work. Well, what I want to show you, which isn't working on the Mac, if that makes sense. But so usually when you go to Edit and Preferences, we've got this Input Devices section, and on the Mac, it automatically detects if you have a graphics tablet plugged into your computer or not. On a PC, there is an extra checkbox in this menu here. You can't see it here because I'm on the Mac, but here you can check that you're using a graphics tablet.
Yeah.
And then the second question is, how can I make use of the graphics tablet? And I want to show that as well, because yeah, you can set this up pretty well. And let's go to Sculpt menu and subdivide a few times. And now I'm going to switch my graphics tablet. So now I'm using the graphics tablet. Here we go. So one of the advantages of a graphics tablet is that we can like paint with low pressure and with high pressure. So you can see that this makes a difference. And maybe let me also bring up the strength here so we can see it better. So this is with low pressure, this is with high pressure. You can see the difference. And one thing that I saw people running into, especially when they work with smaller screens like I do here, is the fact that the attributes manager is cut off here. But if you extend it, you will see that there are two very important buttons, the effects buttons here. And by using these buttons, you can define what pen attribute you want to drive the size with. So if I go to pen pressure, and I even get this graph here, so I can adjust the strength here with the curve and so on. So now, in theory, if I hit OK, if I just paint a little bit, like with low pressure, you can see that the radius is quite low, and if I have high pressure, you can see that the radius is big. So low, big, or low, big, and so on. So this is how you set this up. You need to have a look at these effects buttons, but they will be hidden if you're using like a smaller screen like I have here. You see? So
that's a Star Trek character that you're working on now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And well, another thing that I'd like to share before I give the screen back to someone else is that symmetry is not just restricted to like one axis, like so. What you can also do, and I want to subdivide even more, what you can also do is, instead of using a symmetry, or maybe in addition, you can activate radial symmetry. And what this allows you is basically, starting from any point on the mesh, you can create shapes like this. So this is also pretty cool, especially when you check custom point, because then you can right click, and now I have to remember which button the right click is on my pen here.
Yeah, I wanted to mention, since you brought up working with tablets, I have this large Intuos 4, which is ridiculous and very old, but on the side pens, I've set the buttons to right click and middle click. So I can do everything with the pen and just one button on my keyboard. and it's awesome, so much more comfortable.
Question
Yeah.
for Claudia. I know you mentioned that you had the pen, you preferred sculpting with a pen on the iPad. Sorry, not the pen, the pencil. It's not a stylus, it's a pencil. And are there similar pressure settings, and you can then sculpt in different pressure on the iPad itself?
Yeah, if you go to the, it depends on the brush that you're using, but you can adjust as you like. You can adjust the size, the strength, the spacing. You can have a lot of pressure, you have none. Yeah.
Absolutely. Of the people that do a lot of sculpting that I've talked to, they doing this with not a mouse, shall we say, is the way forward.
Yeah. You have you can adjust even the fall of curves.
Nice. And also Alberto has just mentioned that actually modeling characters is always rather tricky. And we've just got a few minutes left. I just wanted to ask us all if we had any advice. If you're modeling a character, if you're sculpting a character ready for rigging, are there any particular tips or techniques that you'd advise that's a good thing to use as you're starting out? Probably symmetry would be a good one for starters.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of workflow, of course, first finish the modeling, then unwrap the UVs, and then start the sculpting, and just add like the fine details, like stuff like veins, like all of these like little muscle things that you might see, or creases, or just the structure of the skin. These are things you would sculpt, and some of them you might prefer to have as a displacement map later, some which are high detailed as a normal map, but we covered that already. Yeah, and in the end, bake it down so that you use it as displacement or normal textures, and then apply it via the material. That would be my take on it.
Wise advice, I think. Just before we wrap up, any other comments on any of the things that we've been talking about? Anything, little nuggets that you'd like to throw in? I love what Matt was saying about just try by doing earlier on, and that's pretty much how we run our training department. No, but especially for new features. But I think that's the thing. Just you get the experience from actually just trying stuff out, especially if you're having to work out some things, how you might do something by, I forget the exact term, you'll correct me for this, but when you're modeling and then you take stuff away from the model from another object, and so you can reveal interesting shapes. What was that, Matt?
Volume modeling.
That's it, yes. See, I have the vocabulary somewhere in there. It's just difficult to remember it. Exactly that. Fantastic stuff. Thank you all so much for this. And thank you, the nice comments coming in from the questions as well. Please keep these questions coming. We run these sessions every second and fourth Thursday of the month. And as well as asking now, you can ask training@maxon.net. And that comes through all of us. And we're delighted to answer questions, even if it's a simple question like, where can I find a whatever tutorial on Cineversity? And we can usually help with that. And there's been some nice requests for different tutorials. I think Alberto mentioned a couple of them. Drake asked for a couple of different types of tutorials. Those are wonderful suggestions. Thank you, because that helps us work out the best things that we can be showing you and make these sessions more useful. And I'm going to grab this. Yes, I was just about to grab the screen back. Thank you. So let's go to.
Did you by chance load up that Boston Terrier link, Simon? Because I think that'd be a cool one for everyone to see.
Oh, right. Okay. Where did you send that to me, Darren?
Let's see. That was a response to Alberto's question.
I've got it. I've got it here. Oh, I can't copy that. Hang on.
Oops.
Cool.
Here.
Can you just quickly, whilst I'm doing my closeout of where you can find the recording, can you message that to me and then I'll add it in? Oh, here we go. You just did. Okay, copy the link.
Cool.
And
thank you,
paste it.
Alberto.
Yes. Here we go. So this is a goodie.
Yeah, it's
And
a
we'll
very
include
cool
this.
series.
It's a fantastic instructor as well.
Mhm.
So we'll include that in the link to the recording. And just on that, if you missed this at the beginning, we have all the recordings from all the sessions that we run on the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel that we run. And inside those particular sessions that we have lists and links to all the various different topics that we talk about. For example, when Darren and Oliver were talking about the visualization for the vine that we're talking about on Monday, we've also got links to any project files that we're sharing during the sessions. So if you want to those, just go make sure you have a look at the description area. And just as a final thing, please make sure you also come along to the 3D motion show next week. So having watched, of course, Ellie's demonstration of the iPhone modeling on Monday, then please come along on Wednesday as well. It's Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday next week. It's 3 days worth of sessions where we got lots of artists, and that's on the 3dmotionshow.com. But again, we'll put the link into the YouTube description. So thank you, everyone. It's always fun, isn't it, answering live questions about stuff we don't know what's coming, and we're just going to have to do this in front of everybody, which is the whole point of these sessions. So I really appreciate everyone coming along to do that. And thank you also for joining us, Claudia. We'd love to have you back on future sessions to tell us more about Forger. That'd be amazing.
Good.
Excellent. So thank you all. I think is this a record? We've only overrun by 1 minute. Even though we never overrun, we always finish exactly when we mean to. My clock
And we're already wrapping up.
Yes, and how about this? Exactly. Thanks for the kind comments that are coming on the questions in the chat. We really appreciate that. But until next Monday, we'll see you again. And don't forget, you can ask us questions anytime, training@maxon.net. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.